Hey everybody, my name is Bethany. Welcome to the Beauty of Pastel. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different, and it is my first review of pastels here on my channel. I was contacted by the company Colourblock. They wanted to know if I would like to try their pastels on one of my lessons, and of course I said sure. They sent me this beautiful, nice wooden box. It's pretty lightweight. It has these really nice hinges. When you open it up, you can see that there are 100 pastels in different hues, nicely arranged by value and color. Now this painting, I paint from start to finish with Colourblock, and I'm not normally painting my pieces from start to finish with one line or one brand of pastels. The brands across the board have many different hardnesses and different qualities and different feels on the sanded paper that I like to use and for my specific touch of mark making. And so that was a little bit challenging to use just one line. I normally am using very hard pastels in the beginning stages. I moved to a more medium pastel for the body of the work. And then I like to save those final highlights and finishing touches for the softest pastel brands. Since I was challenged to create one painting with one line, I had some things to overcome, but I was really pleased with the results. I'm going to show you the video now, and afterwards I'll share some other thoughts about Colourblock. Okay everybody, I have my UArt sanded paper. This is the 500 grit that I normally use in all of my, most of my lessons anyway. And I have it taped to my backer board, which is just a piece of foam core. You can see the reference photo down there on the left. Now I am painting more of a panoramic aspect ratio versus a more, it's a more classic rectangular, very almost square-ish reference photo. But I love to create a panorama, especially of my beloved Palo Duro Canyon, which is in the Panhandle of Texas near where I live. This is a state park. It's beautiful. It's just a great area for some gorgeous nature. And when looking at the Colourblock collection that I was sent, I really noticed and noted the colors in the set were similar to many of my canyon paintings. Now, one of the things that you'll see is, okay, why is she using some blue here for the trees? Normally, I start off with an alcohol or surgical spirits wash on my UArt with a dark blue hard pastel. Since this set had a dark blue pastel, I thought, okay, well, I'm just gonna try this line and approach it the same way I would if I were using a different brand. I'm putting in dark blues for the shadow scrubby areas of the trees. I'm putting in some bright oranges for the ground plane. To me, that really adds a beautiful sense of layering and depth, especially when you plan on layering greens over it. Of course, this is just the beginning stages of the pastel. I'm blending and moving some more blues down to at the base of the painting. I'm pushing and pulling and just kind of scumbling a gentle covering of color, because I am going to be working towards that surgical spirits wash. Now, I noticed when working with these pastels that some of the pastels are a little harder or softer than others. And so adjusting the amount of pressure that I'm pushing on the paper was a little bit necessary. You can see here that I am just using my fan brush, which I love, especially for grasses and trees, to rub in and let some rubbing alcohol or surgical spirits drip down and meld all of these colors together. This is just my way of creating a nice base color and base values, kind of a value map, which is what I like to call it, for me to then layer on the dry pastel layers. I'm just pushing and kind of scrubbing this fan brush around. I don't normally do an alcohol wash in the sky unless I'm really just making a sky or cloud painting, but this painting is more about the land, and so I'm working mostly on it. Sometimes in an alcohol wash, the dark colors can drip down, especially down the page, into some of those grassy areas. And I love that effect because it can really help you get some much needed texture in your pastel. And oftentimes I have to go right back into those dark shapes even when the paper is still wet and apply some pastel. And so I tried that with this Colourblock line, and it worked just great. Very, very normal so far. This dark blue is a little lighter than the normal dark blue that I like to use, but I really like the color, and you can see that I'm applying some of that alcohol and I'm letting it drip because I really like that effect in the grasses. This nice sanded paper doesn't buckle with rubbing alcohol. If you used water, it would buckle, especially the unmounted paper. You could also use odorless mineral spirits, although I didn't try that with Colourblock. I'm just using my alcohol right now. One thing I love to do is mirror the ground plane hue with the sky color, and so I put in a nice peachy color and rubbed it in with some pipe foam. And now I'm going right back in with that same dark blue with a dry pastel. I like to gently mirror the underpainting, moving warmer. I move usually from dark to light and cool to warm as I'm painting trees and grasses. This is a nice warm green, just scumbling and tapping it on, looking at my reference photo down there and seeing how the light was really very much overhead. So there's not a lot of deep shadow, but there was some beautiful color, and anytime I can paint a path, you bet I'm going to, because it's just such a wonderful way to pull someone into your landscape. When looking at the 100-piece set the Colourblock sent me, this reference photo has quite a bit of sagey green, which is inherently in the landscape of the Southwest where I live. And the set doesn't really have a sage green option. And so I'm going with it. I'm going to adjust my palette for this set, and sometimes that can really lead to some surprising choices that you might not normally have made, and I really love how warm this piece ended up. I'm using this very light blue here. This is one of the lightest values, and I'm going to carve around. Now this is something that I added to my reference photo. You can't see the canyon wall in this reference photo, although it is back there. Whenever I took this photo, I was kind of in the center middle of the canyon, but I love to add just this, the symbol of a canyon wall, especially since that's the area I am painting, and it's not a hard addition to really help frame and bring some distance to this reference. Now you're probably wondering, why did she stop at the sky? That's something I often do if I'm still deciding on a value or a color. I kind of let it simmer a little bit in the back of my mind while I move on to something different. So, I put some color in. I am pushing a little bit harder here. Some of the blues were very, very hard pastels, a little bit harder to layer down that pigment. But I love how that orange is showing through and really helps create a nice glow in the sky. Still working on some of the shadows. Breaking apart a lot of these trees, using smaller and smaller marks and smaller shapes within the trees themselves. Now this reference has a lot of beautiful yellow flowers in it. And so this, the Colourblock set has some really nice yellows in it, some neutral yellows, some really bright pops of, very sunshiny yellow, cadmium yellows. And of course, in a lot of the lower areas of my surface right now, I don't have any dry pastel. It's still, when you push in pigment with alcohol, it really melts that pigment into the paper, and so you don't lose any of your tooth, which is really helpful. I am using a pretty sanded surface here. I do think that the hardnesses of these pastels might be difficult on a flatter paper that didn't have a lot of tooth in it. I loved adding that peach path. That had a really nice peach in this set that was a gorgeous color, especially for my region where the soil is very light and really balances well with the coolness of the sky. Gonna carve around that distant canyon wall a little bit. That's a little darker blue. I'm going to go back in. This is something I also often do, even with my regular palette. Sometimes this helps get you some fun texture in your painting, and of course it will dry much lighter. It looks shocking when you put it on, but really I'm trying to get some tooth back. Since I'm layering hard pastel over hard pastel, I really want to be able to get that texture in nicely and make some definite marks, and instead of making mud. And in this case, normally in a painting I would be moving to a softer pastel, but since I'm challenging myself to use 100% Colourblock, I'm applying hard pastel over hard pastel, and hard pastel in general doesn't lay down as much pigment. If you weren't using one line, you could definitely move to a softer pastel, which just doesn't have quite as much binder in it, and the pigment lays down a little, just more saturated, more thickly. But once I just washed it in, you can see that darkness really helped establish the weight of those trees. And then that once again, that alcohol kind of melts the pigment into the paper. And I was able and am able to kind of adjust the marks in the trees, especially here in a second. Now I'm just putting in my fun little prickly pears. I established the distant canyon wall. And here I'm pushing once again and pulling, scumbling in some nice yellows. That's kind of a really lovely neutral yellow. I'm using a very soft touch, mostly, especially in the grasses. For areas where I want to layer on or make some specific little marks, I am pushing a little harder. Now, I like a very light horizon line, and there isn't a very, very light blue. There is a light blue, but not the lightest blue that I'm normally using. And so this is their white that I'm layering over the light blue and then blending them in. I'm kind of glazing that white over the blue, and it worked great to just bump up that value just a little bit to create kind of a glow in the sky against that canyon wall. I really liked using their yellows here, creating a nice sense of different types of vegetation and foliage in this field. And then I want to add just a little hint of color there at the back. And since I, have washed that in several times, I kind of handled the hardness of the pastel. This is where you have to be creative. You have to figure out and solve any problems that you're faced with. And sometimes, if you're just using hard pastels, it is harder to layer. That's inherent in any hard pastel. They aren't, they just don't lay down quite as much pigment. I'm gonna make some, edge changes in that distant juniper tree, We have a lot of very scrubby trees here where in my area in the Southwest. Of course, we don't have a lot of water or rain, but we do have beautiful blue skies, lots of very saturated colors. I'm going to soften that edge by just tapping my fingers, rubbing on that little edge there just to soften it a little bit, which pushes it away. And I'm going to layer a little dark green on top of the blues that were the prickly pears in the field. Just kind of rotate my pastel, and then I soften the lower edge to create that classic, very cactus look. Now every time I step away from my easel, I love to look at my painting and think about, relax my focus, think about what it might need. I want to define that pathway just a little bit more. And then I love to add my black artist tape just to frame the piece somewhat in my mind, and also to see anything that I think needs major or just slight adjustments. This helps me just remove a little bit of the messy edges and to see it more as a finished whole. Softening those edges. I'm going to work on lightening that sky as it goes across on the other side of the tree. I want the sky to have the same value as it goes across horizontally. Just layering on that white pastel over the blue, and it lightens it up just a little bit. Make sure when you do that, if you're ever working in your sky, make sure you don't have dark green on your fingers. You'll regret it. Okay, you guys, so that is my Colourblock painting. I was really pleased with the results. Stay tuned, and I'm going to share some final thoughts about the product. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed watching that. Here is the piece as it still sits on my easel, and I was really pleased with the results of this little experiment. Now, a couple of things about Colourblock as a line, especially for those of you that are more experienced. I think that this is a great beginner set and a student grade set of pastels for those that are really wanting to build their palette of color and need to have an affordable option. I love this hard case. All of the pastels are set in this really nice foam. They are in little wrappers of paper, but it's very thin tissue paper. It's pretty easy to peel off. It's not sticky at all. Whenever you get your pastels, they're wrapped in this nice little cardboard, paper, and there is a color chart on the back. Now, this color chart does not line up with what is in the box and how they are arranged. And so that threw me just a little bit in the beginning because I couldn't tell what color I was choosing. The pastels themselves are not labeled with any kind of color. It just has the brand name. I think that these are, a really fun option for those of you that are needing another affordable pastel line to explore. They worked great with my alcohol wash. I was really pleased at how well the pastels played together. Some of the pastels were a little harder than others, and there almost seems to be a kind of a light waxy coating that's hard on the outside of the pastels, but as I used them on my sanded paper, that coating rubbed off a little bit and the pastels layered on a little easier. Some of them I had to push a little bit harder on, so there could be some inconsistencies in the, just the general softness of the pastel. But once again, I really enjoyed working with them. I will pull them out again. I will also share with you the palette that I used for this piece if you want to paint along. I think these are wonderful for those that are curious about starting to explore pastel as a whole. Of course, there are so many brands available, and yes, there are many more brands that are much, much softer, but that doesn't always equal better. Personally, I prefer the harder pastels because you can really control how much pigment you're layering on by your, how hard and or soft you're pressing on your paper. Some of the softer pastels are very difficult to control because they lay down so much pigment that especially beginning students have a hard time not just creating a big muddy mess. So for those of you that are interested, look up some Colourblock.